So it's how to access the data, and then where to access the data can be a tricky discussion. As much as any organization would like to have 100% visibility and be able to monitor every packet and every session that goes across every link in their network and in the cloud and everything else, sometimes some tough decisions and trade-offs are necessary. And as you see on this slide, as you move down, the trade-off here is granularity of visibility versus the load on your tools, your monitoring tools, and we're trying to help alleviate that and keep those tools, keep the traffic going to those tools to a manageable level and keep them in the right format. So, there are some trade-offs here, and we'll go through some of these on the subsequent slides. You'll notice, well, many of you have noticed, 100 gig is leapfrogging 40 gig, in terms of their responsiveness to standards bodies and supply chain, everything's ramped up a lot faster. But we are still seeing 40 gig being rolled out in various locations and projects. And the other thing that's not mentioned on here is 400 gig. Many of you at least have an eye on 400 gig in your networks, probably not rolling it out yet, but in my opinion, that's kind of the beauty of working for a company like Keysight, is that we're talking today about visibility of your networks, but much of our business is in the test environment, testing routers, switches, firewalls, next-gen firewalls, everything else. So we're oftentimes pulled into cutting edge technologies like 400 gig right now. And right now we've got test platforms that are on their second and third generation for 400 gig technologies. So by the time it rolls into your production network, it'll be tried and true in a sense from Keysight's perspective.
Yeah, and just a note to add on here, this progression is not mutually exclusive. Obviously, the right mix will depend on your tools and how you plan to use them. More on that in just a little bit.
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah, you can kind of mix and match some of these solutions. This first one here shows tapping the connections between the leaf switches and the spine switches, or your aggregation switches and your core switches. So this gives complete visibility within that mesh, those red dots you see above the server cabinets. And typically this leads to fewer connections being tapped, but they're very high speed. These are typically 40 or 100 gig links within that spine leaf mesh. And this can lead to duplicates. Again, as a packet goes up to the spine switch, it'll come back down, and as a result, if you have that entire mesh tapped, you'll see those packets and those sessions twice. And again, we'll get into more on how we handle those duplicate packets a bit later. Depending on your segmentation, selectively using VTAPs, virtual taps, in those servers within those hypervisors to tap off specific VMs, usually your most critical applications and virtual machines within those hypervisors can be tapped off to get 100% of that, east-west traffic within those hypervisors. And then finally, as you see here, you can feed that traffic off to a broker, or as we show here, a multi-tier architecture of brokers, where the first tier is aggregating traffic, maybe doing some basic filtering of that traffic, and then it's sending that traffic on to a core broker where we're doing things like, if you're looking at ACI for your 4,100 gig network, it may be VXLAN tags being removed and duplicate packets and various other grooming technologies.
Yeah, it's important to note that if all we were to do was to tap between spine and leaf connections, we would miss server traffic between servers on the same leaf. And we would also miss traffic between VMs on the same hypervisor if we weren't adding that virtual side.
Exactly. Yeah. And as we go to this slide, tapping the server leaf connections, we're taking care of that first miss that you mentioned. So we're tapping all of those server to leaf connections within the rack. So we're gaining that server to server traffic that we missed on the previous slide. Within one leaf. And then of course, still applying VTAPs as needed if you really need the VM to VM traffic within those servers for your most critical apps. And these connections, it's going to be more connections, but they're going to be a little lower speed. Typically, these are 10 or 25 gig. And then of course, again, the same packet broker technology to groom that traffic with some of the functions you see there on the right.
Yeah, so back to our discussion about the progression from lower to higher visibility and load. I find that many of my customers struggle with where to tap. To a large degree, it comes down, as I mentioned, to the tools you have and how you're planning to use them. But ultimately, for example, I have a customer right now that decided to begin by focusing on server connections and server leaf, as Tim explained here. But what they did was they made sure to factor into their purchase plans the ability to tap that 40 gig spine leaf infrastructure so that they could eventually monitor latency in the core. Maybe the way to sum it all up is to say you can't measure what you can't see. And at the same time, if you're not going to measure it, why do you need to see it?